r/AskReddit. Therapists of Reddit. What was your biggest, I know I'm not supposed to judge you but holy sh*t moment? I was counseling a 13-year-old girl for anxiety and she reported sexual abuse from her stepdad. I called her mom and told her mother I needed to call Child Protective Services. Turns out that CPS was already aware and the abuse was first reported around the patient's age 7. Mom was aware of the abuse and stayed with her husband anyway. It was a complicated situation, and it wasn't. How could she not do more to protect her daughter? Sorry lady. I'm judging. I work at a residential group home. We had a kid who we had admitted about 4 months prior, when in a family session they mentioned they had parasites. I'm like, what? Mom goes, oh yeah, our whole family has them. We don't believe in getting rid of them since they're part of our biological ecosystem. And I'm just dumbstruck. We spent 3 weeks afterwards convincing this family it was an infectious disease concerns as other residents have fecal eating behaviors and various other unsanitary issues that could cause a unit spread. 3 weeks of education, planning, and worse of all convincing this kid and mother that their IQ wouldn't drop because they had agreed to irradiate the parasites. Lots of CBT work, but Jesus, it took way longer than any of my team expected. Once had a patient whose wife shook their baby to death. He wanted help reconnecting with his wife. At the time I was a young father of a newborn myself, and he triggered a lot of fear in me for my own child, a deep loathing of his spouse, and pity, how pathetic, kind, for the patient. I tried for 3 sessions, met his spouse and everything before handing the case over to my supervisor, who knew about my initial reactions, and tried to help me through it. Unfortunately, it ended up being more about my feelings than his, and I was new to the profession at the time. These things are expected to crop up from time to time, but I was still taken aback by my own reactions. It's not often I get to talk about my profession, but here goes. I was working at a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center and had a client come in who was a self-proclaimed drug lord. As we worked together, he told me about his history. Included in this history was how he got to where he was currently at. During the conversation, this man admitted to selling his sister into sex slavery, forcibly injecting her with several sedatives and narcotics, and having several people teach her a lesson. What this meant, he never shared. He told this story with a blank face, smiling only when he recalled the good times, which he referred to as times when he had enough heroin to get through the day. I'm not sure where he is at now, but this man inspired me to work with victims of sex trafficking, because not only do they deal with the stigma of selling their bodies, they often manage drug addictions. People would honestly be floored if they realized how many people were addicted to chemicals that they were forcibly given. I was once in my psychiatrist's office, a bi-monthly, 15 minutes med check. She asked me what was going on, more as conversation. I told her that in the last 6 weeks, my 3 elders, aunt and 2 uncles, I was guardian, conservator for had died, one right after the other. My wife had a heart attack. My daughter attempted suicide, and my mom broke her hip and had laid on her floor for a week before being found. She drank and ate from the dog's bowls. I got that call within 10 minutes of setting up the last funeral. She stopped the meeting, got on the phone with a therapist in the office next to her and had her postpone her next meeting to speak with me. I was so fucked up, I had no idea. I think she saved my life. I feel like a lot of the comments saying that they never judge their clients might be working in voluntary services or they've been very fortunate in their client base. Judgment isn't an inherently bad thing. It's how we know that murdering people is wrong. So when a convicted pedophile client told me, "Nothing gets me going like a pair of little girls' worn panties," you better believe I judged the fuck out of him. I continued to work with him and I treated him with compassion and respect because he's a human being worthy of both. I did my job because I'm a professional. But I can honestly say that I didn't judge him. I judged that he should never be around children. I judged that he is not yet ready for change. I judged that his access to his own daughter should be closely supervised. That's a lot of judgments. Understanding your own inherent biases and how they influence your work is a very important part of training and practice. I work with youth and adolescents who have anxiety, trauma, and/or depression. Some of the kids I worked with had some pretty severe attachment issues. Regardless of this, I never thought I'd have to seriously explain, you can't just buy a straitjacket for your kid. Feeding your kid ultra-spicy ramen each night instead of the meal everyone else is eating isn't specifically defined as abuse, but you have to understand the emotional abuse that this causes. Your kid isn't trying to kill you because they stand in your doorway at night crying. That's likely because they're scared of their traumatic nightmares, but feel like you will just yell at them if they wake you up. Two contexts come to mind. I often work with people in abusive relationships, and it is incredibly common for people to go back to their abusive partners after leaving. Some studies show the average number of times someone goes back before leaving for good is 7 times. I know why people go back, and I get that it's often a combination of manipulation, financial control, gaslighting, love, low self-esteem, fear, etc. But, man, it is hard to watch and appear neutral. I can say I am worried about their safety, but I can't yell, for fuck's sake, stop going back. What is it going to take? Like I want to. The other situation isn't really judging the person, it's more judging OCD. But OCD is weird. The infinitely weird ways it can show up are so funny and bizarre. Again, I would never judge a person for having the intrusive thoughts they have or doing the compulsions that are somehow linked in their mind to those obsessions. But I absolutely judge OCD and constantly marvel at how creative and weird the human brain can be. Okay, real therapist here. I got one. Some of my clients are shockingly bad at giving themselves credit, holy shit. Like they might get a nearly straight A GPA in a brutal major while battling depression, or overcome years of phobia and get behind the wheel again, or write a literal novel, or raise a kid as a single parent with low income, or build new relationships after being burned, or cope with OCD well enough to hold down a job. And they'll talk about themselves as if everyone on earth is better than them, as if their accomplishments are worthless. And I know it's because of depression or anxiety or another condition, but I'm often stunned by how differently I see them compared to how they see themselves. I just want to show up when some low-effort text-to-speech channel covers this. Therapist here. I am a registered psychologist. This is an important part of our training. Our ethics, code of conduct, standards of practice, and our own moral compass are all considered and to be reflected on daily. During my oral ethics exam, this is an important question and you can't answer. I would never judge anyone, I accept every single person. That's a bullshit answer, as no matter what, we are humans too who have feelings, emotions, responses, and reactions just like anyone else. My answer was that I would struggle to work with someone who willingly and purposely tortures and kills animals for pleasure. I admitted to my panel of 3 that it would be difficult for my one biases to not pass judgment on an animal abuser. This was the right answer, as they expect psychologists to be able to identify certain populations that they may struggle to deliver competent services to. Not a therapist, but my poor mom has only recently sought therapy for the disturbing things she experienced as a child, and the therapist definitely had a holy shit judge moment. My mum and her family fled to Australia when she was 6 from Ireland in the early 70s. Her mother and father were both in the Ulster Defence Association, UDA. They fought the IRA in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. My grandmother was a major player and has killed people. My mum was relaying some of this information to her therapist, and she had the audacity to try to minimize the experience by saying, they were probably just accountants. And my mum had to say, well, why did we flee to Australia after their involvement in blowing up a bus? And why did we have guns hidden in our teddy bears? The therapist didn't know what to do or say. As a student, I had a professor, who was a practicing therapist, specifically working with forensic psychology, who told our class about one of his clients that I'm still horrified by. He was evaluating 2 parents and their second child after their first child committed suicide. I don't remember all the fact, but what I do remember is still wild. Basically, the parents were indifferent to the children, and ignored the first child's depression and other problems. After the death, they maintained that indifferent attitude and never acknowledged any underlying issues. And they continued to ignore their second child and his developing mental health problems. Eventually it got so bad that the second child committed suicide too. The parents were still indifferent and uncaring, and just overall failed to see how they did anything wrong. They later went on to talk to the therapist about wanting to have another child, without ever changing their indifference and attitude. I'm a licensed psychologist and I'll tell you I've never judged my patients. The world is so full of judgment and it's my job to objectively look at someone who's suffering and offer them empathy and a path towards healing. The one thing I've judged is the situations that people survive and continue to live their lives. I've worked with torture survivors, survivors of genocide and famine. I've worked with people whose entire villages were wiped out because a warlord wanted the water well that was sitting in the town. It always gives me pause in terms of the anguish some people face and their resilience. So if I have one message, it would be in the words of R.J. Palacio, "Be kind, for everyone is fighting a hard battle." As a therapist you quickly get to know people, and that quote, "people are a lot harder to hate up close," is thankfully true. I believe this, plus our training and own personal work, helps prevent judgment from coming up for many therapists regardless of what the client does or says. We may at first question if we're a good fit, or worry that we won't enjoy working with a certain personality, but that typically melts away rather fast. That said, after almost 2 decades in the field, I also believe that therapists are either into psychology because it fascinates them and they want to help people, or because they have a shit ton of unaddressed issues and they stumbled into grad school instead of therapy. Often the field weeds these people out, but many stick with it, so trust your gut and never settle on a therapist you can't trust. Hey guys, thanks for watching this video. Make sure to like and subscribe and stay tuned for more content. I'll see you guys in a bit.